welcome to the Fishbowl. We are your hosts. I'm Mike Kosak.
And I'm Stephanie Schneider.
And each month we'll be taking a plunge into cybersecurity threats, from nation-state activity to cybercrime trends and general cybersecurity issues that we're tracking as cyber threat intelligence analysts. We're going to be doing this every month and rotating through different regions, doing a regional threat overview. Last month, we started with Europe. Before that was the Asia-Pacific region. So please check out these episodes if you're new here and haven't already had a listen. And then we'll be starting that over next month. So next month, we'll be doing APAC. So that'll be a recurring pattern for us. Speaking of patterns, for this month, we are looking at North America and North Korean IT worker schemes. And really sticking with the North theme for our special guests, we've got Grayson North and Justin Timothy, who are principal threat intelligence consultants at GuidePoint Security. And we're going to be talking to them today about their cybercriminal research with a deep dive on Infostealers that is actually drawn from a joint blog post that we did together with them, which was a ton of fun. We had a lot of fun writing it, so hopefully you all have a lot of fun reading it, or at least learn something.
It's one of our favorite things to talk about, so I'm really excited to talk to them. But Mike, before we dive into the fun stuff, I know that last episode you shared a fascinating fun fact that I had never heard before about getting struck by lightning. I want to see if you'll play along again and do a kind of a fun get to know you with our audience, since we're still relatively new. I wanted to ask you if you have like any hot take that you feel very strongly about that probably a lot of people would disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to top getting hit by lightning, but I guess I'll just lean into my role that I have grown into as a Generation X misanthrope, and start out by saying I think, in retrospect, I think Alice in Chains ended up being the best grunge band that came out, better than Nirvana, better than Pearl Jam. I know that's certainly a niche opinion, but it is a hot take. I have had a lot of heated debates about that, we'll say, in my day, which probably also shows what a dork I am.
You really outed yourself as a Gen Xer and a nerd with your musical taste, but I appreciate it. I actually, on the music note, my hot take, and I feel like a lot of people would agree with me on this one, but you influenced me to watch K-pop Demon Hunters. Even though it's a kiddie movie, I thought the movie was pretty good, but the songs are a bop. And like I cannot get them out of my head. It's really fantastic. So let's kind of pivot and talk cyber threats, which is what we're here for. So today we'll start with a regional threat activity trends that we're seeing in North America. Just a few things I think stand out that I thought were worth doing a little bit of a deeper dive into here. And one of those is ransomware. The US by far was the most targeted country by ransomware in the first half of 2025, like significantly more than any other country. The US had over 2,000 attacks, and Canada came in second place and only had 249 attacks. So just a huge discrepancy. And GuidePoint also published a report looking at ransomware attacks just at Q2 of this year, and their findings back this trend up too. About 50% of ransomware attacks targeted the U.S.
Just this week, I know Lovesac was hit with a ransomware attack. A few weeks ago, Erie Insurance was hit. So this is obviously still just as pervasive as it's been for the last few years. And that coincides with the other thing we wanted to call out, which was the cost associated with data breaches. So like, for instance, a ransomware, but other data breaches too in general. So IBM just came out with their cost of a data breach report. There's an interesting juxtaposition between the United States and the rest of the world, actually, when it comes to costs of a data breach that's worth calling out. So IBM actually found that the cost of a breach grew to more than $10 million driven largely by steeper regulatory penalties and rising detection and escalation costs. But this is out of step with the rest of the world, where actually costs fell. So about a 9% decrease over the last year in the rest of the world. So, while the rest of the world is seeing decreasing costs, and those IBM associates with organizations becoming faster at identifying breaches, developing their own organic response capabilities. So an interesting bifurcation in trends there between the US, who's seeing an increase in costs, and basically the rest of the world that's seeing the costs go down. Sticking with the North theme, the North remembers here. We're going to move on to North Korea now, and the North Korean IT worker scheme. For those who aren't familiar, what this is North Korea's efforts to infiltrate primarily Western tech companies and crypto-related companies, basically IT companies, their workforce with North Korean workers for the purpose of, one, gaining access to intellectual property, and two, siphoning up all of that salary money and then sending it back to the regime. So that's the primary goal of it. And the way they do this is by creating laptop farms, usually working with some sort of co-conspirator within the country they're targeting. So they'll stand up a laptop farm with like 80 to 90 computers or more. That will be the physical presence in country. They'll set up some sort of fictitious identity, get that person in the door and hired through a number of methods. Once they're hired, that computer is sent on, and then basically they just pretend they're working, or they will do actual work because they want to generate that money, and then send the money back to the regime. And occasionally, that will also support crypto thefts or intellectual property theft.
Yeah, and I think the use of AI here is really interesting because DPRK hackers extensively use various AI tools and deepfake technologies to really facilitate their recruitment efforts, sustain their operations, try to trick hiring managers and companies, and pretty effective at it, it seems. So they're not just using AI to write code or automate tasks, right? They're using AI to help write their resumes, to eliminate any kind of misspellings or grammatical mistakes that they might make otherwise, since it's not their first language, using AI-generated images on LinkedIn. This one's really interesting to me, is using deepfakes to hide their faces in online interviews so they can actually use this technology to just kind of put another face on top of theirs that kind of mimics and generally looks like it's another individual in front of the camera. The technology is still there are still advances to be made to make them even more convincing, but we're definitely moving in that direction. Also, applying to job applications en masse, a lot of times they'll just blast out their resumes and see who bites. So it's really kind of a numbers game. And then, if they are hired by an unwitting company, right? The way that they move the money is a little bit interesting, right? Because the salary will go into an account held by a facilitator who then wires the money to the worker's account, and then that's transferred to a DPRK government account.
Sounds like a lot of work for a country to generate income. But if you look at the relative standing of North Korea compared to the rest of the world and their economy, it makes a lot more sense. So their real GDP last year was about $26.6 billion. So that's and grew about 3.7% year over year. So, which is their fastest annual pace of growth in 8 years. But to put that in perspective, the state of California alone had a GDP of about $4 trillion. So you're talking about a nation state versus a state. And obviously, that is apples to oranges in so many ways, but it just gives an idea of relative GDP for a nation state. So the nominal gross income for individuals per capita within North Korea was about $1,200. So you've got individual motivation to participate in this because it gives them the opportunity to develop a better life, because a lot of these programs will move them out into other countries where the internet connectivity is better, the infrastructure is better. They get more freedom because they're out of North Korea. They get a lot more access to money. So financially, it makes sense for them. One point I do want to call out, because I found this fascinating, exports climbed quite a bit last year for North Korea by about $360 million, thanks in large part to shipments of wigs. So if you take nothing else away from this podcast, please know that North Korea has a burgeoning wig market.
That is fascinating, and I'm very intrigued by this. But I mean, this whole setup is quite lucrative, as you mentioned. Do we have any sense of how much money has been made from this scheme?
Yeah, the most recent overall estimate I saw was in a DOJ report, and they just pegged it at about hundreds of millions of dollars. But again, against a GDP of 26 billion, that's not a small amount. You combine that with their crypto theft activities and stuff like that, and that's a substantial portion of their GDP. Individually, you touched on some of the North Korean worker aspects of this, and how it can help their finances, and how some of them don't even are doing this against their will. But when we talked about the recruitment and the establishment of local infrastructure in July, there was an example of this. An American woman, Christina Marie Chapman, was sentenced for 8.5 years for helping North Korean operatives land jobs at more than 300 companies, and generated over $17 million for the regime, which is, again, like not just a drop in the bucket for a country with a $26 billion GDP. And the other thing is too, so we look at, that's one person exposing 300 companies to this. Those companies are at risk of violating sanctions, without even knowing. A good example, and I give KnowBe4 a ton of credit for this, because they were super upfront about it, which is the best way, light as a disinfectant. As far as, they were super upfront and transparent about their experience. They had somebody get past the goalie, get hired, get into the company, and they detected them, and obviously took all the right steps to mitigate the risk and limit exposures and that sort of thing. Dug deeper, found that they had experienced or been the target of at least 100 applications. And they were super upfront. I mean, talking through like what they experienced and the TTPs that they saw, so that other companies can take steps to protect themselves.
I mean, that's great. That, like, I think just raising awareness so that companies are aware that this is happening, and the U.S. government is also catching on and has been, I think, quite effective in going after this scheme. But U.S. authorities have cracked down on people who have maybe knowingly or unknowingly helped the DPRK regime evade sanctions. They've offered millions of dollars for information. Treasury just announced new sanctions in August. And then back in June, the DOJ also conducted just a massive raid and searches at like a bunch of suspected laptop farms across 16 states. And then last month, the U.S. government put out a joint statement with Japan and South Korea on ongoing cooperation. And those three countries have worked together on stopping this scheme since 2022, because it really is a global international issue.
Yeah, and we've seen this scheme evolve quite a bit since 2022, and North Korea in general, targeting of employment as a whole. They were really at the forefront of social engineering and trying to get job applicants to who are at targeted companies to apply for roles so they could get malware onto their machines and then conduct operations from there. They've once they're fired, they'll threaten to release data. They'll exfiltrate data, and then it effectively turns into an extortion attack. We've seen a pivot more towards European companies, specifically within the defense industrial base and government sectors. But the good thing is, there are red flags that we see as commonalities across all of this. So as you mentioned, Steph, there's a heavy use of AI, face swap software. There's more technology coming out along these lines. There's a company called NameTag that's introducing new technology to help with identity verification, like in real time. Oftentimes they will have profiles with very Western sounding names. So stuff like Brian Jones. Oftentimes they'll be detected via OPSEC lapses. So if they're using proxy networks or something like that, or proxy IPs, there'll be a drop where you can see where the internet traffic is really coming from. They'll struggle to answer questions in an interview about who they are, like just basic questions. I've also heard, and I forget who it was, it might have been CrowdStrike has spoken about this, but just as far as a simple method that works is simply asking the individual their opinion on Kim Jong-un or trying to get them to say something negative about Kim Jong-un, which is has proved to be remarkably effective. Apparently, I have not had this opportunity, but has proved to be quite a red flag.
Now we're going to talk to our special guests, Grayson North and Justin Timothy, who are both principal threat intelligence consultants for GuidePoint Security's research and intelligence team, aka GRIT, about Infostealers. GRIT's such a great name. I love that. So Grayson North works on cybercrime research, intelligence analysis, and incident response functions on behalf of the firm's clients. His career background includes systems administration and cybersecurity operations, and has also worked as an individual contributor for a Fortune 500 company and as a consultant for several clients. Justin Timothy focuses on threat intelligence research, ransomware activity, and reporting to support clients across various industry verticals. Before joining GuidePoint, Justin worked on the malware and cyber threats team at the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance, where he focused on threat intelligence collections, malware analysis, and supporting client cyber threat intelligence teams. So Grayson and Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Honored to be here.
All right, before we dive into talking all about Infostealers, Mike and I earlier shared some hot takes on some music-related opinions. So we wanted to ask you all if you have any music-related hot takes.
I think Taylor Swift's first album, Debut, is actually her best by far. I will not back that up with any facts, just my opinion.
Speaking about Taylor Swift seems like a really good way to either make a whole group of people really happy or really mad, so I'm going to avoid that. I listen to Screamo, so my takes may not be relevant for Taylor Swift, so we're going to leave it at that.
We are very well represented on the musical taste front between all the four of us. Let's jump right into the meat of our topic today, which is talking about Infostealers. So we're so excited to have you guys here because, as you know, the LastPass threat intel mitigation and escalations team, we recently joined forces with GuidePoint Security's GRIT team and you all to highlight the threats posed by Infostealers. The report covers how Infostealers work, from their functionality to how they're sold on the underground market. They've just been a really major contributing factor driving cybercrime activity, since credentials are kind of the keys of the kingdom to accessing digital systems and data.
Yeah, so as we kick this off, I think a good place to start, and I know this is one of the first things we were tackling as we were working on this, but how do Infostealers differ from traditional credential harvesting malware, and what implications do you all think it has for enterprise security strategies?
I mean, if you're thinking of like traditional credential stealing malware, it kind of feels like something like a key logger, where it's really just capturing just the keystrokes that are made and nothing too much else. Infostealers just have so much more capabilities tied them, and they're just so much more powerful in a sense for the threat actors. They target passwords that are stored in a credential vault that's usually native to the browser, which unfortunately isn't very secure. So that can give a threat actor access to logins that a user isn't even using. It also even lets them target things like session tokens and browser cookies, so you can actually recreate those sessions without the need for login, which can bypass MFA. Some of them even have RAT capabilities, so they can like deploy other malware on the machine, or even silly things like open the CD drive. May not be always helpful, but there's just different things they can do with the Windows API and different things to really just infect the victim's machine and use it as a beachhead to really further their malicious activity.
Yeah, I think the targeting of the browser is really the natural progression of credential stealing malware. So I would kind of consider Infostealers kind of, again, the modern equivalent of that kind of thing. And it makes sense, right? I don't know about you guys, but I pretty much live in a browser all day. I don't open up Outlook for email anymore. Every single thing we do as a work function is available via SaaS. So it makes sense to go after the credentials for those services.
Yeah, and credentials really unlock everything, right? I mean, like from customer accounts to backend systems, like they really do enable a lot of threat activity stemming from just that. And like this is why we talk about all the time, like anybody's you know, anybody's credentials can be breached and used and leveraged in a cyber attack for them to get initial access into the system. And then, once they're in, it they can oftentimes move laterally across the system to target or even to downstream third parties, right? To go to target what they're ultimately after. And that's why we talk all the time about the importance of really ensuring that all employees and accounts and credentials are protected, not just, C-suite executives or admins.
I'll say too, Justin, going back to your point about the session tokens, and you mentioned it too, Grayson. That's one thing we really are interested in as well, because we've seen threat actors talk about as passkeys start to become more common. They see that as the sort of next, kind of their next natural target as people move away from passwords. It's going to be session tokens that will allow them to kind of maintain access.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, any more security practices are saying turn on MFA, keep it on. But that's one thing that'll defeat MFA, and that's supposed to be our like golden bullet against this credential access. So it's definitely scary.
Yeah, and to put a real life impact to these kind of credential harvesting operations, we sit right next to our digital forensics and incident response team. They're essentially one of our sister team, and we ride along and gather threat intelligence on a lot of their engagements. And one of the things that they handle a lot is ransomware. And I don't know what other firms are seeing right now. We talked to some of them, but it really seems like right now, upwards of 80% of all attacks we're seeing are against VPN. That's the method of initial access. It's a threat actor reusing stolen credentials or harvesting them via an info sealer and then just getting into the network. Now, MFA is usually not enabled in these cases, unfortunately, and these companies learn a very expensive lesson. But it's one of those things. If you have a browser-based way to access your network, you are at risk of having your session tokens stolen or your credentials stolen.
That's a great transition to kind of trying to understand, why we've seen this explosion of info stealers and what, in your opinion, are some of those factors that are driving this trend?
Yeah, I think a major factor here is the transition of the network perimeter. Traditionally, we've thought about the network perimeter as your firewalls, your web application, your email gateway, things like that. That's where the threat actors would try to hammer on to get home all day. Now, really, identity is the new perimeter. Was very much in progress before COVID, but the work from home mandates from many large companies really accelerated a lot of this browser-based work access and the use of SaaS for everything from Salesforce to email to word processing, everything like that. It all happens in the browser, and with it came a whole bunch of really sensitive data and thus attack surface for people looking to steal and at least extort some of that stolen data. So it's kind of a natural transition there from traditional network defense to defending the identity. And InfoStealer is just the threat actor's way of evolving to fight the new battle.
I think another point there too that kind of derives almost everything is money. This isn't just some guy in their mom's basement making a piece of malware. There's a whole criminal enterprise centered around info stealers, and it's multiple chains too, where money's changing hands to different people. So if somebody is able to pop a victim through like an SEO or search engine optimization sponsored website, that gets one person. Well, the threat actor might not even use those credentials. They might just sell them on something like a Russian market. So they're making money there. And then that money goes back to the subscription service where they actually bought the info stealer, because most of them work on a subscription. It's not a one-time payment anymore. So really, it's just fueled by money. So everybody has an incentive to kind of keep doing cybercrime because it does pay to some extent for some of these actors.
Yeah, I mean, even like just looking at some of these incidents, right? And like seeing how exposed credentials can lead to massive loss for the company as well. Like the Novitex crypto exchange breach, where a Redline stealer compromised two employees' credentials, that led to over $80 million loss for Novitex. So they really are impactful, like, you know, not just for, there's a lot of money to be made, we'll say, from the attacker's perspective, and then also a lot of money that can be lost from the victim's perspective.
I think an interesting note to put on talking about the monetary loss is we do a lot of research where we go on these dark web marketplaces where threat actors hang out and buy and sell some of these credentials. And you would be shocked how inexpensive a lot of these are. They'll generally sell either packages based on targeting a specific victim, or they'll just sell the individual Infostealer logs. And honestly, the going price for these is $10. Which doesn't seem like a lot, but it adds up when you've got thousands of them out there. And if you think about it, somebody with bad intentions and the right opportunity could purchase those $10 credentials and do millions and millions of dollars of damage.
I'd say too, the availability of the number of infostealers that have leaked their source code as well, that make it super easy for people to jump into this marketplace. I mean, there's new infostealers every week. Anybody who wants to, make this money that we're talking about here, it's not difficult. The technological barriers to entry for this, compared to kind of designing and creating your own malware, are minimal. When there's plenty of good stuff out there, you just need to change a couple lines, kind of make it your own, and then you can take it and run with it.
You might not even need to do the coding yourself. You can just vibe code it with AI now too, which is even scarier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when we throw the malware as a service model into the mix, right, then it's just like anyone can do this, because it just really lowers the barrier to entry. Like to y'all's point, like they can, either try to, adapt, build the code themselves, or they can hire this activity out, and it's just super easy to do. But maybe could Grayson or Justin, could y'all explain kind of how this malware as a service model works and really contributes to the proliferation of infostealers?
So basically, the way the malware as a service ecosystem works is that there's a couple different and pretty technical and complex steps that you have to achieve in order to get to the end goal of your malware, whether that be Infostealer or persistence or what have you. And every step of the way, there's a significant amount of friction involved. You may be a bad guy that wants to steal credentials, but you don't know how to set up a web server for collecting stolen credentials, or maybe you don't know how to write the malware in the first place. Maybe you don't know how to deliver it to your targets, to your end users. Maybe you don't know how to set up the infrastructure that you need to host your code on so that you can spray it out and evade law enforcement and things like that. Malware as a service essentially provides a commoditized community approach to this kind of thing. And not only does it decrease that friction, so Joe Schmo malware guy in his parents' basement may be able to just buy their way into being a major malware purveyor, it also enables a significant amount of scalability. So somebody that knows what they're doing and has the funding behind it could theoretically scale some of these malware campaigns as large as they will go. And a lot of them, it correlates. The more victims they have, the more money they make. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, specifically for infostealers, it feels like they're just making the malware and they're just doing a subscription service or a license for somebody to use it. I love how we're using the adage of somebody in their parents' basement, because that's really what it feels like when we're dealing with some of these people. Just like kind of sad, why are you doing cybercrime? But that's another conversation. But really, they're kind of running their whole schemes like marketing. Like they have people who are advertising on forums where these threat actors are lurking. They have people developing the code. They have people standing up little shops and Telegram things to actively do the sales. It could be all one developer, but it's a large process, so it would make sense if they had multiple people behind the scenes. Just by the number of logs and things like that we're seeing on some markets like Russian market, there's definitely a lot of money that they're making here from a lot of subscriptions. So employing people to kind of help them out here is not a stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, Luma C2's organization is fascinating along those lines, where they've got admins, they've got customer support, they've got traffickers that are out there pushing it, like you said. I mean, it's such a robust organization, and it just goes to show the professionalism behind it and the money that they're making, because they can invest that kind of money back into the product and know that they're going to make it back.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be a graybeard by any sense of the term, but that's the difference in cybersecurity right now versus 10 years ago. The difference is the professionalization of cybercrime. I'm sure there were a couple gangs back then that were extremely well organized and they had their processes and procedures in place, but now that's becoming more and more of the norm. And it's all about scalability there. Once you have this organizational structure in place, again, the sky's the limit. You can put more resources into it and theoretically get more money out of it.
Yeah, when I talk about it, sometimes I'll almost compare it to the Industrial Revolution, where we're seeing this specialization of labor, and that's really just kind of kicked everything into high gear and increased the money, increased the velocity of operations and everything else.
It feels kind of grim when you put it that way, but I feel like we're not completely fighting a losing battle. Like, I still think there are some things that people can do to kind of prevent against it. Like even just using like a real password vault. I'm sure you folks might have a recommendation or two there. But even just simple, yeah. But even just something as simple as that, like just using LastPass, that prevents the whole browser impact that threat actors have, and it just kind of cripples the effect the Infostealer can have. It doesn't mitigate it completely, but it's still a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think there, to your point, like there are steps that people can take to better protect themselves against Infostealers. I mean, for one, using a password manager, like you mentioned, Justin, and also taking, implementing multi-factor authentication is another one, because in so many incidents, threat actors, kind of they get these credentials from the dark web, they plug them in, and with no MFA enabled for that extra layer of protection, it's just off to the races, and that's how we see that breach play out time and time again. So, and they're relatively simple steps to take, and yet it seems like we still have a ways to go in really shoring up our protections with those fairly simple precautions.
Yeah, I think that's really prudent. Infostealers, just as an ecosystem, really preys on people doing less than the bare minimum. And there's so many organizations out there that either don't have a cybersecurity program or don't invest in it, or they have the personnel, but they're not enabled to make choices to better defend their organization. And that's exactly what Infostealer malware is targeted against.
Yeah, unfortunately, the human element's always the weakest in the security stack. I mean, we all get lazy sometimes, and it only takes a threat actor one laziness for them to get lucky, then steal all of my credentials. So the odds are stacked against us, but like Grayson said, just do more than the bare minimum, and hopefully we can get by.
That wraps up our episode of The Fishbowl. Thanks to Grayson and Justin, and also to Mike for being a great co-host, and thank you to our listeners. Make sure to like and subscribe where you listen to your podcast so you don't miss new episodes of The Fishbowl. And you can also download the latest threat report link, which will be in the episode description.
Also, if you'd like more information on Infostealers, you can check out the link to the report that we did with our friends at Grit, which we will include here right where you got this podcast.
See you next time.